So last night, there was a really interesting thing that happened with my youngest, who is 3. If you know Gavin, he's real funny, uh, and he's real selfish. So we're driving home, and the older two like to have sleepovers with mommy sometimes. And when they want to have sleepovers with mommy, dad goes to the couch so he can sleep. And so Gavin is just getting to the age, my youngest, where he's starting to be a part of the sleepovers. So we're driving home last night, and Vanessa and I are talking, and she's like, hey, the kids want to have a sleepover. I get up really early on Sundays, so I'm like, that's fine, whatever. And then she says, well, I think Gavin's going to want to too, but that's a problem. Okay, why? Well, because Gavin's going to want to sleep in the bed. He's not going to be willing to sleep on the floor, and it's Brooklyn's turn to sleep in the bed. There's this whole system. Not involved. And so we talk about it. I'm like, it'll be fine. Just crack the whip. He'll be fine. So a minute later, we turn the radio down and we holler back at the kids, hey, you're going to get to do a sleepover tonight. And Vanessa says, Gavin, you're going to get to do the sleepover too, but you're going to sleep on the floor. So at that moment, the kids, Brooklyn and Mason, my older two, begin negotiating sleepover terms. This is not negotiation time. We're doing the sleepover. It's Brooklyn's turn to sleep in the bed. So it pauses for a minute, and then Gavin, the 3-year-old, says, so, I have an idea. Okay, buddy, what's your idea? So, how about Sissy sleeps on the floor, and I sleep in the big bed? No, buddy, you're going to sleep in the bed. It proceeded to be a whole thing, but Gavin at 3 is already beginning to negotiate terms of the sleepover, which there wasn't really a negotiation. It was Brooklyn gets the floor, I get the bed. How about that? Is that a good idea? So if that gives you any insight into what our home is like at times. That has nothing to do with the message. I thought it was funny, and the messages have been kind of heavy because we're in this series on mental health. So why not just start out with something a bit more lighthearted? Today we are in the 4th part of Chains, and if you haven't been here, let me take just a moment to kind of catch you up on where we've been. This is a series all about anxiety, depression, and faith. And it's a series that's really important to me because of my own battles with anxiety and depression and faith over the years. And it's a series that's important to me because I know people. And I know how many people wrestle with trying to figure out how do I reconcile the battles that I fight with anxiety and with depression and with faith. How do I reconcile that with this idea that I'm supposed to be happy and content and at peace in my relationship with God? Now, a quick caveat, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a trained psychologist. And so I try to stay completely away from any of the clinical side of this because that's above my pay grade. But I know people, and I know the scriptures, and so I feel like I am absolutely qualified to speak on where the intersection is between anxiety, depression, and faith. So I'm going to try to stay away from clinical things, but I do want to try to give you some help when it comes to the spiritual side of this. In the first week of the series, I answered the question, I'm not okay, is that okay? One of the biggest things that I've seen in my experience relating to and working with people over the last almost 15 years now is the fact that for a lot of people, they don't really know if it's okay to struggle with anxiety and depression and still be a Christian. The church has done a disservice in a lot of ways. I don't mean City North, I mean the church, generally. The church has done a real disservice in some ways because unfortunately, many churches have put forward the idea that somehow if you struggle with anxiety or depression, that means you don't have enough faith and you need to trust God more. And I just reject that outright. I don't think it's biblical to say that. I don't think you can support that. In fact, I think the Bible is full of examples of hero after hero after hero of the faith who wrestled with mental health struggles. They didn't have the same words for them that we have now, but they're there. So I laid out that case in part 1, and then in part 2, we talked about how to defeat darkness. Because when you wrestle with anxiety or depression, you know that there can be seasons of a lot of darkness in your life. I know that for myself. Again, I've shared throughout some of my own battle with this over the years. But it can feel really dark sometimes, like real dark. So we talked about how to defeat that. And then last Sunday, I began to answer a series of questions. The first one was, why does God let me suffer? And so last week we tackled that question, which is a challenging question. And it's frankly, it's one of the hardest questions, not just as it relates to mental health and faith, but with faith in general. Like, why do bad things happen to good people? You know, that kind of thing. So we tackled that last week. If you missed any of those, you can always catch up online. The messages do kind of build on each other through this series. So if you missed any of those, you can catch up online. If you're a Christian and you struggle with anxiety and depression, I would really encourage you to listen to at least part one. Cliff's Notes, yes, it's okay if you're not okay. But my hope is that for those of you that were actually able to listen to that, my hope is that maybe if you've kind of kept yourself on the hook, that you were able to let yourself off and feel like, okay, maybe it is okay. Now today, I'm going to try to answer another significant question. I'm going to try to answer the question, where is God? Where is God when I'm struggling? Because if you're anything like me, one of the worst parts about wrestling with anxiety and depression is that it feels like God is a million miles away. It can feel like God is nowhere close. Now, before I answer that question, I want to bring up one more thing about questions. It would be a little bit arrogant of me to assume that I can put together a 5-part message series on anxiety and depression and faith and answer every question that you might have. I don't know your journey. I don't know what you may struggle with or may not struggle with. I don't know what your journey with this looks like. And so it would be a bit arrogant of me to say, well, I've covered everything now. So what I've done is try to create a way for you to be able to ask questions and get your questions answered as it relates to mental health and faith. Again, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a trained counselor. I'm none of those things. So please don't ask me any kind of clinical questions. I mean, you can, but I'm not going to try to answer them. But if you have any questions at all about anxiety, depression, and faith, we've created a way for you to ask them. You can simply go to ask.citynorth.church. ask.citynorth.church, and you can submit questions anonymously, or you can provide your information if you want. But you can ask questions there. And if you do, what's going to happen is next week, not this coming, but the following week, at some point, we still are nailing down the details, but at some point, I'm going to sit down and do a roundtable with Kyle, who's one of our City North Kids team leaders, and has a Bible college degree and has a theological background, and he's an incredible communicator, a good theologian, and we're going to sit down and do a little bit of a roundtable, and we're going to answer all the questions that we've been asked. We're going to video that, and we're going to put it online, so it's not something that you've got to be here for, but we're going to try to make that content available to you in a way that you can consume whenever you want. The idea being, if you have anything at all that you want to know, that you wrestle with, that you struggle with personally, you can ask that 100% anonymously. I can't get your information if you leave your information off. So 100% anonymously, you can ask whatever you want, and we'll do our best to answer from a biblical position, okay? So to this point, just to be totally transparent, I've only received a few questions. There's not been a lot. So, I would like to really try to take time to be diligent and give thorough, thoughtful, sound answers. So if there's anything at all, please feel free. You could do it right now for all I care. But head to that website, ask your questions, and then we'll answer them next week, okay? So today, where is God when I'm struggling with anxiety and depression? This is challenging because if you've grown up in church or if you spent much time in church as an adult, the reality is that you've heard or you've read, you've experienced people talking about how God is close, God is near. But it doesn't feel that way sometimes. Perhaps more significantly, so I, many of you know my story. I grew up in church. I've been in church my whole life. And when I was younger, in youth group and stuff, we did retreats and camps and all the stuff that you kind of do in a kind of a typical evangelical church background. Well, there's this phenomenon that happens, and if you've never been a part of this kind of environment, you may be like, "What? This all sounds weird." But if you've done this at any point in your life, you know that there's this phenomenon that happens where you'll go to a camp or you'll go to a retreat or you'll go to something like that, and you get a spiritual high, right? You just feel all the warm fuzzies about Jesus. It's like he's just like right here. Call it like the mountaintop experience. And then what happens? You come home and it vanishes. And there's a problem that tends to happen where we assume that the mountaintop is where we're supposed to just live. Like once we've experienced the mountaintop of God feeling really close by, we have to hang on to that. And crucially, that somehow if we lose that mountaintop feeling, that we've done something wrong. Or that maybe we're not being obedient enough, or we're not following enough rules, or insert whatever you want there. But what happens is we take the mountaintop, and I believe we incorrectly assume then that's how things should be all the time, and then when they're not, we begin to ask typically introspective questions about what have I done wrong? Or we point the blame back at God and we say, well, God's left me. I don't know what to do. I've done my best and God has left me. And all of that stems from, again, what I believe is a very incorrect, non-biblical assumption that once we achieve the mountaintop experience or feeling, that's where we're supposed to live. This happens even, maybe you've come to faith in God later on in your life, and maybe it was kind of God saved you in kind of a miraculous way. And maybe you experienced kind of a high in your faith there where it was like, man, nothing's going to stop me, and then life. Regardless, we make this incorrect assumption that the mountaintop is where we're supposed to live. In fact, one of the most important characters in the Bible, a man named David, he dealt with this. In Psalm chapter 13, David was a poet, and he wrote the majority of the Psalms. Now, if you don't know the background of David, this is like top three biblical characters. Like you got Jesus, and then you've got probably like Paul, and then probably David. I mean, this is Mount Rushmore in the Bible, okay? One of the most important characters in the Bible. He battled his own, what I read in the Psalms, as some depression, some anxiety. But he also addresses this, like, I'm in the valley. We use the mountaintop valley kind of thing, right? Like, I'm in the valley. Now, David was a guy, you cannot accuse David of not having enough faith. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons for that, but you just can't. Like, biblically, there are very few people that had the faith that David had. But this is what David writes in Psalm 13. "O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? How long will the enemy have the upper hand? Turn and answer me, O Lord my God. Restore the sparkle to my eyes, or I will die." So that doesn't fit the biblical narrative that you're supposed to live on the mountaintop, does it? Here we have a giant of the faith who's saying, God, like you're gone. How long are you going to be just gone? God, I need some life, or I'm just going to die. So here's the thing. In the very first part of the message series, I laid out account after account after account of people that are biblical heroes who wrestled with anxiety and depression. And so I'm revisiting just a bit right now. But in my working with people, in my own battle with this, I think feeling like God is distant and then somehow attributing that to us. Like if God feels far away, it means I've done something wrong and I've got to do something right or else I'm never going to feel God again. It's so defeating. It's so defeating. And so here's the thing. Like, you've got to understand that feeling God is a human problem. Feeling God is distant is a human problem, not a you problem. It's a human problem, not a you problem. In other words, it's a condition of your humanity, not a reflection on your faith. So if God feels distant and you somehow are attributing that to you and what you've done wrong, now, I guess, let me pause. It could be that. But more often than not, what I find is that God feels distant because doesn't everybody when we're wrestling with anxiety and depression? Like, when you're anxious and depressed, what relationships are thriving? What relationships feel like really close, really strong? Typically none, right? Like, that's one of the things about anxiety and depression. You're not close with your parents when you're anxious and depressed. You're not close with your kids. You're not close with your friends. You're not close with your coworkers. You're not close with your small group, right? You tend to be kind of reserved, and you tend to be kind of turned inward because we go into protection mode. And we tend to attribute everything people do to somehow, we make everything a reflection on us, don't we? The point is, however that manifests in your life, the point is when you're anxious, when you're depressed, you don't feel close with anyone. You don't feel intimate with anyone. So why would we assume that our relationship with God is going to somehow be different? Why do we assume that when we're anxious and depressed, we're going to maintain the mountaintop? We're not. We're just not. And in my experience, and I think the biblical account bears this out, in my experience, far more often than not, that feeling of distance isn't because we've done something wrong. It isn't because we've lost faith. It isn't because God's angry with us. Like, by the way, that's not how God works. Just, this is a side note, but God doesn't work like where if you make him mad, he leaves. That's not the way he is, okay? But this is not a God is angry situation. More often than not, it's just we lose intimacy when we're anxious and depressed with everyone. And so even if you were on a spiritual mountaintop, even if it did feel like God was very near, and now all of a sudden he feels distant, that's normal. Like, that's normal. So don't beat yourself up. Don't take unnecessary responsibility. Don't spend your time beating yourself down feeling like, oh, God must be mad at me. I want to show you a story that to me is a fascinating story from the book of 1 Kings. The Old Testament of the Bible is kind of the beginning half. Man, there's some incredible, incredible stories in there. And there's this story in particular. If you've been in church, you've heard this story before, but the context for it is really interesting. It's a man named Elijah. Now, Elijah's a prophet. Elijah was a big deal because Elijah at the time, a prophet, was someone who God would speak to, and then that person would go speak to the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, on God's behalf. Prophets were not well liked because often they were giving messages that people didn't want to hear. And Elijah was a powerful prophet. He had done some incredible things. He had, in fact, as the story that we're about to read is coming off of what was literally a mountaintop experience for Elijah. See, at the time, there was this evil king and queen named Ahab and Jezebel. In fact, if you've ever heard anyone referred to as a Jezebel, this is where that comes from. So Ahab and Jezebel, wicked, evil king and queen. Elijah has been warning them for a long time. Hey, God's going to take all this away. God's going to destroy the nation. We got to turn things around. They're not listening, not listening, not listening, not listening. Eventually, things come to a climax on top of a mountain. Elijah goes to this mountain, and there are 400 prophets of a god they worship named Asherah and 450 prophets of a god named Baal. Now, this was a problem because God did not accept the nation of Israel worshiping other gods. So Elijah goes to the top of the mountain and he confronts Ahab. Jezebel is not there. He confronts Ahab and he says, listen, God is not okay with this. It's got to change. And they do this whole challenge. And Elijah builds, or they build an altar of wood. And Elijah's like, look, if your God is the true God, pray to him now. Say, all your prophets, pray to him. Ask him to send fire down and consume the altar. So they do. And nothing happens. Then, by the way, if you think that the Bible's like sterile and kind of boring, you just aren't reading it right. Because Elijah starts to mock them. And he starts saying like, oh, maybe your God's just taking a nap. So maybe you should pray louder. And they pray louder and nothing happens. And he's like, oh, can't wake him up, huh? Nothing happens, nothing happens. So eventually, they continue on and nothing happens. So Elijah finally says, okay, it's my turn. So it's one man facing off against 950, did I do that math right? 850. 850 prophets. Elijah builds an altar and he gets real cocky. He gets jars of water and just pours them all over the wood. Now, if you're not a pyromaniac like me, you might not know that's a problem for fire. When the wood's wet, it doesn't burn very well. So he takes, I think it's 12 barrels, and he just pours them all over the altar to the point that he digs like a moat around the altar and it's full of water. And then he's like, watch. So he prays out loud. He asks God to intervene. And in a moment, fire from heaven rains down and consumes the altar in totality. And then some other people who were with Elijah kill all the 850 prophets. That's a little bit of a different, we're not going to touch that part of it today because that's problematic in some ways, so I'm going to ignore it for right now, okay? Mountaintop experience. Look what God did. Can you believe that? He showed up. So then what happens is Ahab returns to the queen. He tells Jezebel what's happened. And these prophets were like her little minions. So she's furious. She sends a message back to Elijah. And she says, by sunrise, you're dead. And so he's like, okay, gonna leave. So he flees. He runs away and hides in a cave. Because what else do you do when the queen's about to kill you? Mountaintop. Now he's hiding. And then just a short time later, we read this. Elijah was afraid and he fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Which, by the way, he left his servant so that nobody could know where he went. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree, and he prayed that he might die. And this is the prayer that Elijah prays. I've had enough, he said. Take my life, because I'm no better than my ancestors who've already died. Again, let's be clear. You can't say Elijah didn't have enough faith. I mean, I don't know about you. I've never prayed fire down from heaven. Maybe you've wanted to a handful of times on some people. Never worked. Has it worked for you? No. So here's this man, a prophet of God, who has done a miracle because of his faith like nothing I can even imagine. And the very next thing he does is sits down under a tree and prays that he'll die. It's the very next thing he does. Because you don't always feel like you're on the mountaintop. And in this moment, let me give you my paraphrase here. If I'm Elijah, here's what I'm saying. God, what do I have to do for people to stop trying to kill me? I've done everything you wanted. I've been faithful when it would have been easier not to be. I have followed you where you've asked me to go. I have done what you've asked me to do. and the king and queen are still trying to kill me. I don't want to do this anymore. Now, Elijah doesn't ask the question, but isn't he really kind of going like, where are you? Like, you just destroyed the altar. We slaughtered the 850 prophets. Why can't you just take care of them? Can we just deal with Ahab and Jezebel now? Where are you? Why are you not doing the things that would smooth the way for me? Because I've done everything I can. Where are you? Now, what happens in this moment is that an angel comes to Elijah and talks to him and says, hey, go to this. He says, go eat, go drink, and then you're going to go travel to a mountain. That's all he says. Now, Elijah, being a man of deep faith, is like, well, in the Bible it says, so Elijah did it. In my head, it went like this. Oh, fine. Maybe not. But here's the thing, like the biblical characters were more human than you realize. They weren't like, okay, yes, Father. I promise you that's not the way that went down. Oh, all right. So he gets up and he goes and he travels for 40 days. He ends up at this mountain, Mount Sinai, which is a historically important mountain for the nation of Israel. And he calls out to God and he's like, God, what are we doing? God, what are we doing? And God asks him, he says, what are you doing, Elijah? Why are you here? Which is a funny question. Well, you told me to. You told me. Here I am. Why are you here, Elijah? And Elijah starts to rattle off some stuff, and it's not really what God's looking for. So then he says, all right, go ahead and climb the mountain. Go to the top of the mountain. And Elijah gets to the top of the mountain. And again, God comes to him, and he says, why are you here? Which, again, in my version, in my head of this story, I'm pretty aggravated with God by this point. Like, I did the thing on the mountaintop. Now I traveled 40 days and I'm on another mountaintop. Can you tell me what you're up to? Because I don't know what you're up to yet. I'd like to know. I mean, here's the thing. I'm not much of a planner. But I'd like a plan there. Can you tell me what's going on, God? But God doesn't really address what Elijah says. Instead, look at what happens in 1 Kings 19, verses 11 and 12. God says, go out and stand before me on the mountain. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. Now again, if you've been in church, you've heard this. There's a wind that's so strong it blows rocks down. There's an earthquake. There's a fire. These are some of the most powerful natural forces on earth. Some of the biggest things that God could have shown to Elijah in this moment. Now, the way we think about God sometimes is like he is, please don't misunderstand, it's like he's big and powerful and like if you're a kid that grew up in the 90s, like remember when Jafar turns bad in Aladdin? Remember that? And he's like gigantic. God is big and God is powerful. But God doesn't always operate from that place. In this moment, rather than being in the bigness of the wind, the fire, or the earthquake, God waits for it all to pass, and then he whispers. As I was thinking about this message today, and I was reflecting on this passage, I started to get aggravated on behalf of Elijah. Like, God, if you're just going to whisper, why didn't we just whisper back at the broom tree? Why'd I travel 40 days and climb a mountain? I mean, Have you ever been in a spot where like you're so anxious that it's like somebody's got to get a hold of you before you can even see them? Have you ever seen somebody who's that anxious? Where it's like there is no reality. I'm reading between the lines a bit, but that's what I suspect God was doing. He was creating some distance between how Elijah was feeling so that he could get a hold of him. Brooklyn, my oldest, has struggled with anxiety her whole life. When she was, 3-ish, she started to have night terrors. And I remember her telling me one time, she was 3 years old, and she told me that she had had a dream that we had all drowned and she had watched us. And I'm like, I don't have a reference point for that. Like, I've never worried like that in my life. And here's my little baby girl at 3 years old, wrestling with that. We've never seen anyone drown. We've never talked about that. Like, I don't know where that comes from. So she's had bouts of this on and off, and there would be times, especially back then, where she would wake up in the middle of the night just like blood-curdling screaming. She'd had some night terror, some dream that was so real that she thought it was real, right? And if you've ever been around someone who's in that state of panic and anxiety, like I would go in and I would grab her and I would bear hug her, but it was like she wasn't even in the room with me. And I'd have to like almost shake her. Like, baby, 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 it's okay, it's okay. And then as she would kind of come out of it, I would hold her tight, and what would I do? I would whisper in her ear, it's okay, Daddy's here. It's okay. You're safe. But for those of us who struggle and wrestle and fight with anxiety and with depression, there are times where there is nothing in the world that we can see except for that. So why did I tell you this story about Elijah? Well, Elijah was clearly depressed under the broom tree. Again, I don't have clinical training. I know enough to know that that would qualify to receive a clinical diagnosis of depression. Praying for death would qualify. In the middle of it, he's so overwhelmed by this sense of just failure and loss. I believe what God was doing in this journey and with the wind and the fire and the earthquake was trying to shake Elijah. And then, once he had his attention, he said, hey, remember who I am. Now, here's the fascinating thing about a whisper. You have to be close for a whisper to work, right? I have a microphone right now. If I did not, and I began to whisper, you wouldn't know what I was saying. You couldn't hear me, even in a room this small. A requirement for a whisper is nearness. In this moment, God could have boomed his voice in the earthquake, boomed his voice in the fire, boomed his voice in the wind, but he did not. He waited till the big things were done, and then he said very, very quietly, Elijah. And for me, this is such a beautiful picture, a reminder that God's tenderness and God's compassion, his kindness, is usually communicated to us in intimate ways like a whisper, because God is very, very, very near. So feeling like God is distant is a human problem, not a you problem. But the reality is, God whispers often. He whispers his love for us to remind us, hey, I'm right here. I know it doesn't feel like it because all you can see right now is the nightmare. I know it doesn't feel like it because right now all you can see is the thing that scares you to death, but I'm right here and I have you. I have you. So what do you do when it feels like God is a million miles away? I think you listen for a whisper. For God's only a whisper away. think you listen for a whisper. Because God's just a whisper away. So I want to close with a picture today. It's a verse that I read in week 1, and it's a verse that has become very, very near and dear to my own heart personally. It's another passage that was written by David, who we started out with today, who knew what it was to struggle and to wrestle with anxiety, with depression, but who also knew what it was to live experiencing the continued faithfulness of God throughout a lifetime. David wrote one of my very, very favorite passages in all of the Bible when he wrote, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed." The Lord is close. He's close. If you feel like he's far, he is close. If you feel like he's a million miles away, he is close. If your spirit is crushed and you feel like you can't go on, the Lord is very close. If you wake up every day wondering, how am I going to make it? The Lord is close. If you're waiting on some giant miraculous sign, well, maybe he'll give them, but he isn't going to be in them because he's already with you. He's already right there. And my guess is, just as he was for Elijah, he's trying to whisper through the chaos, it's okay. I'm here. I have you. You're safe. So when it feels like God is far, and if you're in a spot right now in your life where it doesn't feel like God is far, that's great. But it's coming, because it does for all of us. It might not be related to anxiety. It might not be related to depression, but it isn't going to feel like you're on a mountaintop forever. And in the seasons when it feels like God is a million miles away, I want you to remember he's not in the earthquake and he's not in the fire. He's not in the wind. He's in a gentle whisper. And he whispers because he's right there. And the God that I know, he's whispering, it's okay. You're safe. I have you. Have peace. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your compassion. Thank you that you never fail. God, thank you that no matter what we face in this life, no matter what kind of brokenness, no matter what kind of darkness, no matter what kind of fear, of worry, God, no matter what kind of mental health struggles we have, thank you that you are bigger, that you are stronger, and that you don't leave us. Thank you that we can count on you. And God, thank you that when we walk with you for long enough, we can look back and we can see, and we have evidence. We can know that you walk with us because we've seen you do it time and time and time again. And so, Father, for everyone that's in this room right now, God, if they're in a place where they're just struggling, where they're weary and run down, where they feel like they don't know how to carry on, I pray in this moment, I ask boldly, with confidence, that you would show us your presence, that you would whisper through the chaos, that you would tune our ears to hear your voice, so that we could find peace in knowing that we're not alone. Before we finish up today, I want to give an opportunity. Perhaps you're here today and maybe you don't know God. Maybe you've never entered into a relationship with him. Maybe you have at some point, but you've kind of walked away from that relationship over time. And maybe you're at the end of your rope. Maybe you feel like Elijah did. I'm not any better off than anybody. I may as well just be dead. If you're at the end of your rope today, I want to give you an opportunity to make a choice. A choice to turn things over to God because he loves you. He's for you. He cares. The Bible teaches us that if we believe in our heart that Jesus was raised from the dead, and if we speak with our mouth that he's in control, he'll save us. That's it. No religious stuff. No church attendance. None of that kind of junk. If we believe in our heart that he is who he says he is, and if we speak with our mouth that he's in control. And so if you want to find peace, if you want a different road to walk, I want to give you the chance here and now to make a choice to change directions and to make a decision to stop going your own way and to go God's. So what is going to happen is I'm going to pray a simple prayer of faith and confession out loud. There's no magic words. Just simply what the Bible teaches us to do. And maybe you want to make that choice, but you don't know the words to say. Then just simply pray alongside us. Everybody in the room is going to pray it out loud together. And if you want to make that choice today, just simply pray it from your heart to your Savior, and he'll hear from heaven, and he'll save you and set you on a new journey. So if that's you today, would you pray with us? Say, Jesus, I believe in you. I believe you died for me, and I believe you rose from the dead. I've been going my own way, but today I want to make a choice to surrender to you. I give you control. So lead me. Show me the right ways to live. It's in the mighty name of Jesus today we pray. Amen. Hey, put your hands together for anybody that may have made that choice today. Listen, if you did make that choice, let me be the first to say congratulations. It's the most important thing you could ever do in your life. But I do want to ask you to do one simple thing for me, and that is to grab the green card from the seat back in front of you that says Next Steps. On that card, there's a place to mark if you made a decision for Jesus. Fill that out so that I can know for two reasons. One, so that I can be praying for you and our team can be praying for you on your new journey. And number two, so that I can send you some information with some next steps you can take if you would like to. You can just fill that out at any point here in the next few minutes and drop it in the silver buckets by the doors on your way out. Our team will get that and process it and get back to you, okay? So if you made that choice, congratulations on making the most important choice you could ever make. Let us know so that we can come alongside and so that you don't have to do it by yourself, okay? Now, real quick before we head out for today, I want to mention one thing. I actually left it back there. I intended to have a team member back. Dave, will you go into Dream Team Central on top of that popcorn machine and grab that little thing for me, that award? So I want to make mention of something. I got to say a huge thank you to the team members of ours this year who have served at the concession stands at Big Walnut High School. If you, and by the way, I'm not doing this to single out who has not, but if you have been a part of even one single concession stand, would you do me a favor? Would you stand for me real quick? I know, I will call you out if you don't. Yeah, that's odd. Would you guys give a hand to these guys? There have been a ton more. You go ahead and sit down, that's it. We've had, I don't know, somewhere in the ballpark of 25 or 30 different people serve at concession stands at Big Walnut High School for football games this year. And Friday night, we actually served, and the athletic director told me before the game that they were going to honor us publicly as a church. They were going to bring us out. They didn't bring us onto the field. They brought us onto the track in front of the field in between the third and fourth quarters and made an announcement over the PA thanking City North Church for all that we've done to help the parents of the students who are playing. And they gave us this little recognition award. And here's the thing. This is just a thing, right? Like, it's a pretty cool thing. But it's just a thing. But what that represents is tremendous. What that represents is years of work, hours upon hours upon hours of time and energy given for one reason: because Jesus gave to us first. And so we just freely give and we serve and we do everything that we do for this city so that they'll know there's a God who loves them, not so that they'll know there's a church at 250 Rainbow Avenue. And God has honored that, and he has blessed that, and he has opened doors for us to make a bigger difference in this city. And I am honored and I am humbled by those of you who, whether through the concession stands or whether through Fifth Sundays or whether through serve days or whatever it is, for those of you that have been a part of serving the city ever at City North, thank you from the bottom of my heart for being some of the most genuine, kind, caring people I've ever known, and for doing all that you can to not make this the thing we do. Because as much as this is fun and enjoyable, this is not church. Church is when the people of God go beyond these walls to make a difference for people who don't know God yet. So for those of you who have ever done that in any capacity, thank you so much. It was absolutely surreal to me standing on that track from the high school that I graduated from, that I left and never wanted to come back to, and hearing the name of our church over the PA. Thank you for your kindness and for your generosity for this city. It is making a tremendously huge difference. So wanted to share that with you guys. Man, that's all I have for you today. Next week, we're finishing up Chains with part 5. We're going to answer the question, how can I be free? So I hope to see you back next Sunday. Be blessed. Have a good day.